Good evening. The news gang is here, and tonight the election whistle, and it is game on. Who is in pole position? Also on the show tonight, the spending limits and the unlimited quarrels about them. Why IEBC and legislators are poles apart on new regulations. Plus, coalition building or coalition cause. The president, the 6 men, and the other short stories, including that central question of the mountain. Yvonne's take is a pre-election wish list, or shall we say a dream. The memo is a call back to humanity. The kicker cries for our golden athletes. On the punchline, thou shalt ask no questions. The gospel according to a Kenyan politician. And on the angle tonight, the money and the box, the ballot box.
So you published before approval, yes or no?
We published limits, not the regulations.
Which are parts of the regulations?
The commission was under the view that we can proceed and gazette the limits as much as the regulations are waiting to be tabled before the House.
Limits that were set were supposed to have been treated as regulations as given under Section 29, and they are definitely null and void.
We can't allow an illegality and constitutional provisions to find their way into our legal system.
All right, so that's the IEBC team there in a back and forth about the rigmarole of the law, as it were, with regard to this now controversial regulations. And basically, the team there saying they did the right thing. The delegated legislation committee members not so agreed. Wilson Mushora is doing our sign language interpretation tonight. And ladies and gentlemen, this, some people would say, was expected, Yvonne. I mean, it would have been quite strange, in our context at least, to see members of parliament all clapping and say, bring it on, cap our campaign spending.
Yeah, and not just capping it, but regulating it and taking a look at where the money is coming from. Because this is not the first time those regulations are making their way in Parliament. It was, I believe, the first time. So first of all, the Campaign Finance Act was, made law in 2013. That's about 8 years ago. The regulations were first placed in Parliament in 2016, I believe. Yes, and that was just before the 2017 election. So, of course, something being moved conveniently because of the 2017 election. Here we are again.
They relied on that thing that says, you have to
do it
a year 1 year before.
And this was sat on, and here we are. And one of the reasons you would imagine parliamentarians who have to approve regulations that limit and regulate their own spending is that beyond the big numbers, the 4.4 billion and that sort of thing, I mean, the premise of this law is literally to introduce some structure into the fundraising, to understand who are the donors, who is behind this money. We know of several times and incidents where they're beholden to certain shadowy figures and all of these amounts, and then they have to sort of pay back all of these people that have come in. So the idea is to promote transparency, accountability in the funding, to introduce structure, to separate the candidate from the campaign as well, and make sure that they are accountable. They're supposed to be giving reports to the IEBC as to who has given you the funding, how much, to what extent, and not just for the candidates, but for political parties as well. So naturally, all of this back and forth that we saw on a matter of technicality as to when they did it, did they do it 4 days before, should they have subjected it to public participation, is definitely not news to our ears with what we saw in Parliament. Definitely something accountable for them, because they now have to tell us, this is who I got money from. I got it from Joe, I got it from Francis, I got it from Jamila. This is the amount that was given, and also how we spent it, including the idea of making sure that they're not receiving money from foreign governments, for example, in Section 14.
Jamila,
on the same matter,
just giving an example. But anyway.
On the same point, Joe, because they're supposed to declare and say, this is how we spent the money, this is where we got the money from. I wonder if that would happen really clearly, and how IEBC will monitor it, because I think we'll have thousands of candidates. Remember, we have those running for president, governors, senators, MPs, women rep, MCAs. So how will the IEBC be able to monitor? Maybe they have the mechanism put in place to do that. And it's supposed to cover a particular period. But now, other than the official campaign period, which has been set by the IEBC, which is supposed to start, I think, 30th of May, 2022 to 6th of August, already there are candidates who are already doing early campaigns from now, a year too. How will you monitor such? And I think also the fact that now it has not really clearly been defined. I was reading an article about how exactly what period is covered by this new law, how exactly...
which is not quite clear.
It's not clear, exactly. Those are the questions being asked. And then what are the parameters? What was the formula that was used? Because IEBC did not disclose the formula that was used to arrive at the figures, the 4.4 billion for the presidential candidates, the fact that they can only 20% of that can come from their own from an individual supporting a campaign. 880 million shillings is a lot of money if you look at that 20% from the 4.4 billion. Yes. But then now, again, the parameters have not been explained in terms of how did you end up with that figure. I was listening to the story by Leto. Some of those legislators are complaining about the amounts of money that they've been asked. They cannot go above 15 million in some constituencies and all that, saying that they spend quite a lot. I was listening to, I think, I don't remember who it was, but he said some of the money they spend on, a lot of it goes into security, because they need to go to all these places. That they spend a lot of money on security. Some say on election day itself they have to spend this much. So for them, or spend vile wanataka. I don't think that's how organized democratic societies should be run. There should be a limit.
But beyond, Linus, beyond what Jamila is talking about, I mean, you should have listened to those MPs. Some of them basically saying that, we have to feed these people who come for campaign. I mean, essentially saying that, after you have talked to these people, you have to figure out what they are going to eat.
Yeah.
Like
tomorrow, yes.
And I thought that was quite interesting. I mean, considering these people have been eating the other days, I mean, for the 5 years. But just looking at the arguments back and forth, I think I was even looking at what Dennis Waweru was saying there, and saying like, who's this who's going to come and tell me? I go and tell people, no, I can't pay school fees for you because Chebukati has refused. Like, there are all these very interesting arguments, which at the end of the day, are very typical of things that we see with elected leadership in the country.
As expected, our elected leaders are running away from the issue itself, because they need to be honest about the intention of campaign finance controls. These regulations, what are they intended to achieve? Because when you look at the history of campaign finance regulations, and way back in the US, 1907, when they had the Tillman Act, which specifically went for two things. It went for monies that are going to be contributed by corporations, one, and went for monies that would be contributed by banks. The purpose of the Tillman's Act was to ensure that corporations and banks are not owning the presidential race by basically funding candidates and putting them in office because they are able to, they have the money to do that. When we look at campaign finance regulations, we must always remember there is bad practice behind it that needs to be stopped. Because campaign financing talks about sources. You have to really disclose who the source of your finances is. You then have to disclose the amount as well. How much has been given? And then who has it been given to? And then how regularly? Campaign finance regulations intend to clean politics. But it's going to be very difficult in Kenya, as you've already seen, because of a number of underlying facts. Election funding in Kenya is a very mysterious space. There's so much money in it, but nobody will tell you where that money is coming from. You will remember an enduring image in the 2013 elections, where Eldoret, the airspace was full of helicopters. And we hear stories that, helicopters are not available in Wilson Airport. If you are going for a short trip like Francis would want to dash to Banana in a chopper. In 2013, 2017, they'll not be available because...
That's just an illustration.
Just an illustration.
Yes,
for the record.
It goes to the highest bidder. You know, they're going to use to put it into better use, and that's why the history of campaign funding is replete with these efforts to try and clean politics. We should ask in Kenya, how do we fund our elections?
Yeah, and Francis, you've been looking at the technicalities. I was kind of puzzled because the IEBC basically was relying on, I think it's Section 18, if I'm not mistaken, of this act that we're talking about, which seems to say that the IEBC will gazette these things. But then I saw the speaker almost triumphantly saying, no, I think Section 29 is the clincher, because then it talks about regulations generally and saying they need to be approved by Parliament. But just looking at this back and forth, it intrigued me how, as Linus was saying, no one is really focusing on why were these things put in the first place. This law is actually derived from a principle that is already set in the Constitution itself, and then it comes into legislation, and now we are haggling over the regulations. But it seems to me that people are not interested in us knowing what they are doing with within that, Linus calls it, mysterious space.
Three things. One, you cannot talk about campaign financing without campaign financiers. If you want to disclose the limits, if you want to set the limit and demand full disclosure on members of parliament, or all candidates, on how much money they have collected, then you will also require them to say collected from who. Once you answer the question of collected from who, you will now go to the next question. Collected for what? So, because there's no free money.
No free lunch.
There's no free lunch in whatever. So, if I finance your campaigns, there's something I'm expecting in return. So, the technicalities were more excuses than reasons. The excuses because it was to try and justify the inability to apply the regulations and the limits. And by there, they are unlikely to be applied, even in the next election, and the election after, and the election after. Why? Because once you set the limit, and you pass the regulations, and you require contestants to disclose the sources of their funding, very many financiers of politics will go under the table. Why? Because they are not people who want to be out here, to be known that I financed so-and-so's campaigns. Because these are guys who are expecting returns in terms of businesses, in terms of protection, in terms of all manner of things. So I'm investing in you and in your campaigns so that in return you do A, B, C, D for me. And there are known financiers in this town. Speak to members of parliament, they will tell you, so-and-so gave me 10 million, another one gave me 20 million. So you are now being required to name these guys. You will not be able to name them.
And they know how to do what, you know, in the Bible there's something that is called casting the bread in many waters. So if there are like 5 candidates, you find that there's 2 million here, 5 there, 10 there. It's hedging your best. Just in case, you know, it's Jamila and not Gashuri, you still be good. You say, you know, like, I also...
You are also my guy.
Yeah, you're also my guy. So a lot of it's
but over and above that, LK, look at the question of money in politics.
Yeah.
You know, because this is a coin that has two sides. If you go campaigning without money, how many people are willing to listen to you? Kama hauachi kakitu. You will go and tell them all manner of nice things, policies, sera, manifesto, and then at the end of the day, they'll ask, unatuacha aje? And that is the reason why money is a factor in politics. And so the question of how much you're spending, there's also the question of why you're spending it. So every so often, if after every 5 years, you can't see your member of parliament, kindly remember the 500 bob that he gave you during campaigns is the worth of your vote then?
How long will it feed you?
Linus has been itching to say something.
Not so much itching, but really just wishing to go to a bit of the issue of sources. It's not just about the persons that actually donate, but also the means and how that money was generated. In this country, there are a few realities that we really have to talk about. One is money laundering, where you get money that is illicit, coming through and ending up in campaign financing. And then we look at our history, it's even uglier than that. In 1992, this country printed money called Jirongo, 500 shilling notes.
Yeah.
And that money went into financing the KANU campaign. That is where we got this Youth for KANU 92 group of people who had a lot of money, a lot of that money named after the chairman of the group, YK 92. So campaign financing doesn't just look at individuals and donors, but also the means. And when you look at our elected leadership, even right now, you'll ask a lot of questions about how they got money to finance. In at least one court case, we saw how money can flow from maize scandals, the National Cereals and Produce Board, into political accounts. We've seen how money also can flow from NYS to accounts of people and end up possibly becoming sources of funding these elections.
Sugar money too.
Sugar money too. So we have sugar MPs, we have maize MPs.
Yeah.
I think those two key products that produce a lot of elected leaders in Kenya.
It's interesting. Someone has not said ni vifaranga vya sukari, but I think, I think one of the things, as we take the break, which is also important when you think about this thing, is why would, for example, in Nairobi, I think the cap is 117 million, and if people are complaining that is too little, probably they spend way more than that. But if you were to work with this conservative figure, 117 million that has been put there by the IEBC, it basically means that for the 5 years, for you to recover, because I'm not going to use money and then...
Return on investment.
Yeah, return on ROI, very important. So if someone is going to spend 117, they need to make 1.95 million every month for the 5 years to recover the 117, all things, inflation and all those notwithstanding. But we know the salary of a governor doesn't get to 1.9, almost 2 million a month. So the question has to be asked, why would people invest? Why would people invest so much? Yeah. They probably know something we don't. But we need to take
the deals.
We need to take a break. When we come back, we'll look at that deficit that the IEBC says they have, and of course the coalition building and that question around the mountain. Don't go away.
Una vile wanashindwa kukata.